We'll be inviting Dr. Olutoyin Oyelade for our presentation. Before we do that, I'm going to read Dr. Olutoyin's bio. She's a seasoned leader with a doctorate in leadership and management from the University of Maryland Global Campus. As a partner at INCAP, she oversees all aspects of business development and operations. Her extensive career spans roles in financial services, management consulting, project management, and funds management across Europe, Africa, and North America. Previously, she held executive position at CASA Development and Intercontinental Groups. As president of CASA Foundation, Dr. Oyelade manages the organization, which is one of 30 selected by the Canadian government to administer the $100 million Black Entrepreneurship National Ecosystem Fund. CASA Foundation also hosts the annual Friends of Africa Economic Development Conference, promoting African business growth. Dr. Oyelade is active in community development and serves on various non-profit boards, including Vital Manor and Core Belt Foundation, contributing to corporate diversity and social impact initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Oyelade.
Thank you again very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, it's such a honor, it's such a pleasure to be here tonight, joining you at the public lecture, the annual public lecture, the second one at the Restoration House. I say it's Restoration House Leadership Institute. That's the way you're described in our books at CASA Foundation. It's not just a church, but it's actually also a learning institution where great minds are shaped. All right, so it's such a joy, it's such a pleasure to be here. I bring warm greetings from CASA Foundation and our team members, and I do have some of our team members in the room tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to become, coming back to them. I'll just get started. I think it was in 2022 that CASA Foundation actually started engaging actively with the Restoration House as a leadership institute. And so we really did get engaged with a few of the other people, some of the leadership members and so on, because we had a program and we wanted the Restoration Leadership Institute to be a part of the program. And so we reached out to quite a number of churches actually within the GTA. And so we do actually work with a number of churches within the GTA. Restoration Leadership Institute is one of them. But in 2022, we actually had very constructive, very, very meaningful engagement. And I must say that it's been very profitable for us dealing with and working with Restoration Leadership Institute. And so today, I just would quickly like to acknowledge again Pastor Olayinka and Pastor Toyin Dada. Thank you so much for working with us. Thank you for allowing your team also to work with us at CASA Foundation. It's such a joy, it's such a pleasure, and I'm really most honored to have been invited again this year to the public lecture. And to all the members of the panel, it's such a joy and it's such a pleasure, and I'm sure I'll be hearing from you at some point. A part of the lecture, I would actually defer to you as the experts, and so we'll be coming back to you. All right, so having done that, let's get on with it. So tonight, I've been asked to speak on the topic of social isolation. Social isolation as a public health challenge, and so that's exactly what we'll be talking about. I know there's a Q&A, and the Q&A appears to be much longer, like a 40-minute Q&A. I'm not sure what those questions are, but I think I take some comfort in the fact that we do have some experts in the house tonight, and so we'll be doing this together. Thank you again, everyone. All right, so let me quickly say, when you talk about isolation, social isolation, I mean, there are so many parts to it. And in my journey as an entrepreneur, in my journey as an investor and an entrepreneur, I see that the topic of social isolation, it cuts across different parts. And when you look at social isolation, I think I'm so much more familiar with social capital, because that's what I do. An entrepreneur is always looking for how to build capital and so on. And in the process of doing that, there are a lot of issues that just might occur, that just might keep happening along the way, that would actually cause you as an entrepreneur to become isolated, even in such instances. And so this evening, I'll quickly like to start with the statistics. I do have a slide, and I'm just going to ask maybe one of our team members to just help me use the clicker to go along while I just use this. It will be faster for me. Thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, so in Canada, when you Statistics Canada shares with us and says 3 in 10 older adults live alone, and a third of them report feeling isolated. What does that mean to us? Isolation and loneliness were associated with poor wellness practices. Isolated males, particularly those aged between 65 and 74 years, who live alone, are usually more vulnerable to poorer mental health. And in the United States, our closest neighbor, I must say, over 60% of adults in the United States report feeling lonely. Young adults between the ages of 18 and 22 are the loneliest age group. The number of people who live alone has increased by over 30% in the last few decades. And social isolation is as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so I'm sure that we can get a picture of how harmful that could actually become. And of course, a few groups actually relate, they draw a similarity between isolation and loneliness. And so here it alludes to the fact that this increases the risk of premature death by up to 50%. 1 in 5 people say they have nobody to talk to about important matters. And social media use is associated with increased feeling of isolation, of loneliness, and depression. And so people resort to the social media. They get some fun, and they catch up with other people, old schoolmates, and so on, but they do not really have the real relationships that we're looking to build, the connectedness that people are looking to build when you talk about social isolation. All right, so I quickly draw, and of course, we're told also by statistics that men are more likely than women to report feeling lonely and isolated. However, women seek help faster than men. And so I do have a few slides there, quickly drawing the correlation between well-being and loneliness. And so people who actually feel lonely or they are usually isolated, usually it will result to a gap in their mental wellness. And a correlation also between age and isolation. The older you become, elderly people usually will become isolated because they don't have the strength to move around, they don't have the strength to go out, and a lot of people don't just generally check on older people, all right? And so increasing isolation rates are also recorded, particularly, of course, when you compare with the pre-pandemic statistics. And so during the pandemic, for obvious reasons, a lot of isolation. So what is this isolation we're talking about tonight? Isolation, a state of complete and near complete lack of contact. Now, I'm not here to define things to you. I know you know this. We're all knowledge-based people. But then talking about social isolation, drawing a correlation also between that and loneliness. They're two different situations. Because loneliness could be temporary, because you're in a situation, you're single, you're old, and you really don't have people checking on you and so on. But isolation is a deliberate, intentional decision to remove yourself from the midst of people because of certain situations and just completely ostracized. You've not been ostracized by society. Half of the time, it's you taking the decision to say, I'm just not going there. I'm not going to be a part of this anymore, and so on. So what are the causative factors? If you can go to the causes. As most of us are well aware, and I believe that at some point, one period or so in our lives, we've actually been faced with a minimum level of isolation, which you could describe as loneliness. And then, of course, you've had to really separate yourself from groups of people. And so, what usually causes isolation? The causative factors. Sometimes a disease, it could be diseases, is a fact that people just found themselves ill. And so they are incapable. So there is that level of incapacity to do the things that you would normally do regularly. And so you're not able to move around as you wanted. And so you stay at home. We've had situations like that. A lot of people are in care. You also have situations where people, on account of life issues, crisis, disappointment, job losses, they just decide they've had it. Life has been really difficult. It's been bad, and they decide to isolate themselves and stay at home. Or you were looking for a job. You finally, and having searched and searched and searched, you decided, I've had it. I've done my best. And the best wasn't just good enough. And so people decide to stay. So sometimes, and it could be on account of a loss of loved people, loss of a marriage, some people going through a separation, a divorce. All kinds of situations can actually bring about what we now refer to as social isolation. And so social isolation then is a deliberate, intentional way where you move yourself away from the regular people that you relate to, people who give you joy sometimes, or perhaps at some point they've given you joy. Now they no longer give you joy. You've just removed yourself from their midst. It could be family members, it could be work in the workplace. So I quickly cite an example. I think it was in 2017 when I was at a conference. Speaking at the conference on workforce relationship, work-life balance, workforce relationship, and so on. And a lady, after I had spoken so succinctly about my experience in the workplace, the relationships that I had, garnered over the years that actually led to our first investment in some of the investment firms that we manage. And I spoke so highly of the people around us, the community, the ecosystem of support. And the lady asked a question from the audience and said, but what do you do when your back has been broken? Because I cannot relate to all these things you're talking about because in my own situation it's totally different. And that she decided to come out on that particular day to the lecture or to the conference because a friend compelled her and forced her, but that she had not been out of her home for 3 months. I really couldn't imagine it because where I was coming from, I think I was just settling down in Canada at that point. And because of my investment banking background, we were compelled to go on the streets and market and sell and interact with people. If you can't sell, you can't work. So I couldn't even imagine or picture in my mind how it was possible for someone to sit at home for 3 months because he said, in quotes, somebody had broken her back. I was really, of course I know what it means to break your back, but I was trying to relate that to a workplace. And I think I just said to her, if they break your back, you stand tall and show them and prove to them in faith that no one can break your back, and you stand tall in the midst of all men and do what you need to do. It was just a normal rhetoric from my marketing background. By the time I sat down with her and I understood what she was going through, it wasn't as simple or it wasn't as easy as getting up and showing people nobody's broken your back. She had been through all kinds of situations, from imposter syndrome to racism to all kinds of situations, all the isms as you have them in the books, from sexism and all of those other things, nepotism, favoritism. So she finally got a job that her heart really wanted, her dream job. And then a lot of people kind of, how people just make you feel you're not included, you're not wanted. So it was part of the racism thing, but it just wasn't clear at that time to her. And by the time she was made to feel like she couldn't really perform on the job, she was let go. So it was very shameful for her, the way she was let go. I think it's different from a lot of, maybe culturally, where most of us are from. You're let go, right? But they don't pick up your stuff and then walk you to the door like a security person. And so things like that, it really affected her. So a lot of people might have gone through that, and then they are absolutely in isolation. So what do you do when life situations like that have happened? A couple of other people said to us, we come in with a lot of potentials, with a lot of certificates, but you're not able to put to use what you've learned. What you learned in school, what you've been taught, what you know you have the capacity to do, but you're not able to actually give expression to what you should be doing. What do you do in situations like that? A lot of people are isolated on account of that. And of course, I already spoke about the racism issues. For some people, well, people talk about limited transportation, language barriers, and things like that. I know that people of our ilk, I think we're usually able to surmount those types of challenges. I think those ones are like below the, below the line. They're not things I would usually make, generally BIPOC, black immigrants actually isolate themselves, because we're goal-getters, And so I quickly moved to some of the reasons why people are also susceptible to isolation: low income, incapacity to actually manage the costs and the expenses related to moving around in the city, going for what you really want, and so on. Particularly for newcomers and immigrants, they get isolated because of that. There's also the part called the emotional isolation, where it's also actually a part of social isolation, where people that you've actually interacted with so well over time, you just suddenly find out that there's really no meeting of minds anymore. And so it's kind of like a defense mechanism where you now begin to put up a barrier, setting boundaries, and so on, because you really want to protect yourself from the impact of racism and all the other things that we talked about. All right, so what are the general consequences of social isolation? Generally speaking, yes, we know about the mental wellness issues, the gaps, the fact that people now become sick because they've been sitting at home. Because human beings are actually made to move around, up and down, and to relate with their fellow human beings effectively. So what are the consequences? Well, I do have here the issues of distrust, the issues of fear. When you are boxed in by others, you think everyone has an agenda. You can't even trust anyone anymore. Anyone around you, you quickly say, oh, you can't share your thoughts, even in business. So you have a business idea, you're a professional, you're looking for the next level, and you're looking for people to support you to get to the next level. So what are you going to do? You've got to speak to people. You've got to talk to people that were there before you. How can they help you? How did they get there? Learning from their lived experiences and their learned experiences. But you find that when you're in a state of perpetual fear, mistrust of other people, you're not going to talk to anyone. Because every little thing you are supposed to share with people, you already are living in fear. And so you really can't get help, because no one even knows what you're doing. You're living in isolation. So the people that ought to recommend you either for promotion, or recommend you for business expansion, or recommend you to your next founder or the next fund, if you're a business person, they really can't recommend you, either because they don't know you so well, you've been so isolated, you don't know where they are, they don't know where to find you, you have a big idea, you can't even execute, neither can you operationalize those ideas. These are some of the consequences. As general as it sounds, they are major consequences of isolation, particularly if you're in business. And so it's important that we take note of this. Negative and low self-esteem, getting easily disappointed. You're not able to manage your expectations anymore because you've been disappointed too often. And so sometimes the people you should really be discussing freely with are not your go-to people anymore. The people that would offer you solutions, generally speaking, they are not the people that you will really normally gravitate towards anymore, because you've been disappointed, and justifiably so. So this is not a lecture to actually, condemn or anything. Justifiably so. Perhaps you shared a few things and so you heard about it somewhere else. So you're not willing to tell anyone anything anymore. You just withdrawn. And so these are some of the consequences from such disappointments, and they lead to isolation. You begin to hide, as it were. You are not able to manage conflict anymore, and you are not where you're supposed to be. Sometimes it even leads to drinking and drug abuse. For some people, yeah, because sometimes, and I'm sure we can think about that, if you're alone, doing what really? And you've been there 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so what next? And so a few people begin to indulge in all kinds of vices that are not mentionable, they are not worthy of mention, but those things happen. So how, and of course we talked about the medical implications, heart disease, stroke, diabetes type 2, and so on. And you can imagine what that could do. Death, in some cases, very extreme, but it could happen. How can you really tell if you're isolated? Because a lot of people sometimes perhaps haven't given it some thought. How can you really tell that you are actually in a state of social isolation when you begin to withdraw from the things that used to give you joy? The people that you easily could speak to about a few things, personal things, business issues, career, you're not able to discuss with them anymore. So you begin to withdraw gradually. Sometimes a few people actually, when there's a gathering like this, they really don't show up anymore. They used to show up, but they don't show up anymore. As a matter of fact, they even become anxious because they are going to a certain places. You begin to know. Those are some of the signs that you are getting isolated. Although what isolation is not, it's also important to state that isolation is not getting alone time, self-care, some time to yourself, a time of retreat. Because as human beings, we must always find time. Having worked all day, then we retreat again and think. A time to think, a time to retreat, a time to discuss ideas with yourself, alone. That's why we call it alone time. Every human being needs that. I know we have retreat with our people we work with, and so on. You need your alone time to think about what you've done through the year, to think about how the next year is going to pan out, and so on. That's not isolation. You need time for fun too, because we're human beings, and we're social human beings, right? And so we need time to actually discuss with ourselves. Think about it, and so on. We need time for fun. That's not isolation. Please do it as often as you can. We need time for vacation. Do that also. It's not isolation. And you can be alone doing all of those. But what is important then is for us to deal with social isolation. There are 3 ways. The list isn't exhaustive, but I'm just going to discuss this. There's a preventive part. There's a corrective part to it based on our own experience. And so dealing with social isolation and its negative impact is talking about the corrective measures, for instance. One of the ways that we do that, and I'm going to cite a few examples from CASA Foundation and some of the things that we do. Getting support from mental wellness experts, counselors, and so on. Some of the experts that we have as we speak to them. Being deliberate about the company that we keep. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the adage that says we are like, show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you are or tell you your character or whatever. And I'm sure we're familiar with that. Building and improving our connections, our networks, because you are as important, you are as significant as the company that you keep. And so this is really important. Addressing conflict, distilling tension. You know those things that actually could easily aggravate you. And so understanding how to build some boundaries, understanding how to separate yourself from some of those situations would also help you in, improving your wellness and making sure that you're not a social outcast, just saying it the other way. So making sure that you do this is really important. So what are the corrective measures? You find purpose in serving others. I really cannot overemphasize that. The process of finding your purpose on one hand and serving others on the other hand is actually, there's a correlation between that and actually your mental well-being. The more you serve people, the more you feel fulfilled in the areas that you love. So, of course, if you're not a tech engineer, you don't want to get into that serving other people because you're going to mess that up, right? But then if you are, depending on what you're good at, you found your talents, your skills, find a way to serve other people with those. There's a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy in doing that. And that's actually a panacea to ensuring that you don't become isolated because you're doing what gives you the most joy. That is really important. All right? Get a hobby. Don't just say, I love fishing, and in the last 18 months, you haven't even gone fishing, So get a hobby and make sure it's something you love to do, and find some joy in that. Create bonds. A lot of people talk about strategic alliances. What about the platonic ones? The ones that are not really strategic, because you really don't know when a relationship will turn strategic if you don't even start from the basics. Because a lot of people talk about that. There are several books on strategic alliances, form relationships, and so on. Sometimes if you don't even know the person beside you and form very platonic relationships with them, how do you really know? How can you tell that those relationships could actually turn into something really major for you in the future? But because you're looking at someone and you're looking at what those people have done, where they have been, what they do, what they represent, they are strategic alliances. But then, perhaps, you need the platonic ones. That's the point. Now, preventive measures encourage healthy and diverse relationships. Give value to others. Celebrate other people. I wanted to say quickly, as I begin to wrap up, I wanted to say that in a church community like ours, it's really important, and I'm going to make the slides available to you. I think I'm going to make the slides available to you. I think that's the wrong one. It's not bold enough. I think we have one that ought to be shown. That's the one they should have given the tech guys. In a church community like ours, it's important that we pay attention to the early warning signals. The early warning signals, and that's why I talked about the preventive measures. So it's all the corrective measures. It's already happening, so you can correct them. Find a way to do so. Those are some measures. But there are preventive measures. And in a church community like ours, it's by finding quickly the early warning signals. People who show up, who don't show up anymore, and so on. How do we do that? Deal with the issue quickly. Don't just say, like we say in church community, don't just say, Satan has taken over that has stolen the heart of that person, let him be. No, you are your brother's keeper. So we got to look for them. We got to create hubs. We got to create platforms. We got to create communities and circles, hubs, groups, where people can actually interrelate and get connected. It's one of the ways to quickly, prevent that and nip it before it happens. And so I wrap up with this verse of scripture tonight. And I'm taking the scripture again because I know I'm in a church community, so I'm going to do this. I'm taking it. It's a commentary from the book of 1 John, chapter 5. And I'm reading quickly. It's 5 to 6. It's just a commentary, and I'm reading the Voice. It's the Voice version. And it says, just as we do not get to choose our biological brothers and sisters, we do not get to choose our spiritual brothers and sisters either. But what comes along with loving God, the Father, is loving all of his other children, even the really annoying ones. That's what the verse of scripture says. It's there, the Voice. You need to read it. While it might seem to be easier to go off and live in isolation, rather than put up with those we are not naturally attracted to, those that are not lovable, there are responsibilities that come with living in a spiritual family. Or in fact, the responsibilities that come along with being a role model in God's family. We reflect our worship of God by living in respect with our Christian brothers and sisters. And so I added, we must be disciplined enough not to be the ones who rock the lives out of other people, yet be compassionate enough to give healthy and constructive feedback. Remember, today, most of the work that Christians are expected to do is 10% in the church and 90% in the world. And I'm sure I speak your minds when I say that's what Acts chapter 1 verse 8 says, from Judea to Samaria and so on. So the time that we spend in the church is really limited, 10% of our time. More than 90% is actually spent outside, elsewhere. So how are we impacting? How are we showing ourselves as great examples that will make sure people are not isolated? So our role then, to conclude, is for us to advance, to amplify, and to empower people. And I make bold to say that God himself is more than able to find us worthy to be his witnesses everywhere we go, and then to bring people together so that the connectedness that we build as a people together can ensure that no one is excluded in the long run. All right, so tonight, I thank you again for allowing me to speak. We're going to make the slides available to you. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'll speak to your question on connectedness, how to ensure you remain connected. I think certain routines would work well. And so you find that we're social human beings. That's just who we are. And so you realize that even if you've lost people, then you have a desire to get connected again after a while. So setting routines becomes really important. Routines like showing up. You get you get invited to a lot of events. And perhaps if you don't get invited, you search. So on Eventbrite, there are different platforms actually. And so you can fish out, you figure it out. What's happening in Hamilton or Halton region? Hamilton, yeah. So what's happening? Is it related to my sector? What am I looking for? Am I looking to build my career? Am I looking to build a new business? So what's happening in the neighborhood? And so even if we don't get invited, so we find those platforms where we invite ourselves. What I mean is Eventbrite would make sure you register for some of those events, and then you get there, you get connected again. So now you get connected again or reconnected. How do you keep those relationships? It's a question. The routines. Let's have tea and coffee. I think somebody mentioned that. You get tea and coffee. You find a way to communicate with people. What are the similarities? What are the common denominators? And do you want to really speak to that? Because we've got to build relationships if we really want to grow. Whether it's a career or a business, we need to grow. And setting those routines to meet with them again, to set tea meetings, coffee meetings, get to meet me in the office, get connected on LinkedIn, like what people are saying, don't just keep scrolling, and things like that. Because because I know we do have a habit of checking out what people are doing and we scroll. Sometimes because we're looking to develop our career or business, you like what people say, you make a comment. There is no way people will not notice who is commenting on their articles. And there is no way you will ignore people like that forever. So one of the things we usually recommend if you're looking for a mentor, it's one of the ways to, right? Accountability partners and so on. They just don't fall from the sky. They're not just going to happen. You've got to look for them. And one of the fastest ways to do so is to leverage the advantage of social media. So sometimes we don't even know the type of people we're looking for. Mentors, accountability partners, colleagues, people in our industry that have become like role models to us that we're really looking to follow. We need to select a few of them, 3, 4, 5 at a go sometimes. And then you follow them. And then you like and comment on some of the things they say. And then you write them actively by checking their website. How do you write them? You check their website. Perhaps they're working on LinkedIn. You DM them. We find a way to get connected to people. And sometimes if you've identified them, maybe 6, 7, 8, sometimes you might actually write 3, 4, 5 of them, believing that 2 will eventually respond, so that you don't get discouraged. So you're looking for a group of people in a sector, engineering, tech, or whatever. You've researched into them, you Googled them up, and so on. Write about 4 or 5 of them so you don't get disappointed. Just like we're looking for a job, and we don't apply to 1 or 2 at a go. We apply to several, believing that 1 or 2 will eventually pan out. So it's one of the ways to stay connected. And then showing up is also important. So you've searched on EB, you found it, show up finally. Then you finally show up, keep the appointments. Don't keep missing them, because it can be a put-off. If you have appointments and you're not able to meet them, you're not able to meet them up. Somebody also said, can I go on? Somebody asked a question on introverted people. Yeah, introverted people. I think the same would also apply, because no matter how introverted we are social human beings and we want to grow, like somebody cited an example of wanting to do great things and sitting in the dark winking. Nobody's really seeing what you're doing, although you're introverted. But it's still not an excuse. We want to make giant strides in business or want to increase in career. We've got to get up and be intentional about doing that and applying maybe, some principles closer to some of the suggestions over there. But people will be introverted. People will be extroverted, sanguine, whatever category you fall into. We've just got to reach out. The other thing is perhaps search for similar people, because you will identify people within a crowd. Someone is there, you're networking, everyone is mingling and so excited to be there. But you see a few people just sitting by the corner. Sometimes they say we black, BIPOC people usually don't mingle a lot. When you get to an event and you see people standing alone and you think you're introverted, it's the people that stand alone that you gravitate towards. It's just statistics. It tells us that they will usually connect faster. But some people get to an event and everyone is excited, and talking. But those ones are lonely in the corner. Sometimes if you go to them, you find that you have a meeting of minds and you're able to form connections easier, much easier. Thank you. I'll take a stab at that. I'll try. Yeah, I mean, everyone is a sinner, so we come into Christ, and I'm sure we know. So we're accepted in the beloved. Now, I think that, and it's heartwarming that our pastors are here. I think it's a structural issue. I think a structure might address that in form of creating structures and platforms, which I reckon we might already have. And I think it's actually making sure that we take advantage of those platforms. So in terms of creating an ecosystem, like an ecosystem of support, whether it's a counseling area and so on. And so there's one part of it where people are labeled. There's another part where even if you're labeled, you seek help. And I think that could be found on such platforms. One is for each one of us to understand that, and we keep getting ourselves educated over and over again, because sometimes it's actually a lack of education to understand that we're accepted in the beloved and that everyone has gaps and that we have to always embrace ourselves in love, because that's actually what the Christendom, the community, is all about. So first, if you feel you're labeled, I think you need to seek help, because you won't even open up to anyone. You want to isolate yourself completely. So how do you assure yourself that you are really loved and accepted in the beloved? That one, God loves me so much, I know it. Even when nobody's telling you, you have to tell yourself. But the other part is now, if you're at that point where you really can't tell yourself anymore because the damage has already been done, that's where you find help. So circles of support in the counseling department. There must be also a way to escalate it to the next level if the counseling is perhaps not working. So that's why I said we're glad that they're here, so that they will be able to take charge. But this is a structural issue. Platforms must be built to intentionally address those issues, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
I can try. Laziness, social isolation. I don't think there's a correlation. I think, not absolutely. I think laziness could lead to social isolation, but it isn't social isolation. You're lazy, you're plain lazy. I think I just like to say it that way because I think that man is actually made to get up. And when I say man, I mean all peoples, made to get up and go do the work. Laziness and isolation are not the same. If you're lazy, you're lazy. If you're isolating, there's a reason. If you're lazy, exactly the word itself, is the definition is different. You just don't want to do anything. Social isolation is on account of the reasons that we clearly articulated earlier, all the speakers, because of illness, because of a state of mind, because of rejection, racism issues. So some things led to that isolation, and you need to deal with them either medically, emotionally, or, on some other way. But the laziness part, I think the Bible also addresses that, that we can't be running from the lion on the street and then hiding. We've got to do the work. It's not the same thing. Thank you again. Tonight, I think I've had a wonderful time, but I would leave this with you. Think again about the type of connections you want to make, leaving a lasting impression, any room you get into. It's one of the ways that people remain connected with you, because you've got to leave something in the mind of people that they will remember. So try and craft that out and master it by heart. Usually we call it a 1-minute pitch, an elevator pitch. My name is this is what I do, this is where I do it, and this is how I do it. So you leave it in their minds and they want to remember or get connected with you on LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms. That's how to remain connected. Thank you again, everyone.